Hi, my name's Stella. My sister said I poisoned our grandfather with bleach, and my parents stood beside her, swore it was true, even when they knew it wasn't. They didn't just betray me in a moment of panic. They built a lie, slow and careful, like a family quilt stitched with spite. The worst part? I almost believed them. I was arrested, in socks with holes, with my dog whimpering at the door. And still, part of me hoped someone would say, "Wait, this doesn't feel right." But no one did. So now I ask, what kind of family looks at their daughter and sees a problem worth erasing? Wouldn't you want to know what they were protecting? And why it had to be me they buried? The morning started like every other. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window in long golden stripes, and the smell of thyme and bay leaves drifted through the air as I stirred the pot. The leaves outside had just begun their fall dance, floating across the porch of our old farmhouse in Asheville. I liked mornings like this, quiet, predictable, before anyone else in the house began performing their roles. I reached for the salt, gave the soup another swirl, and glanced toward the doorway. Grandpa Harlan was still asleep upstairs. I'd checked on him an hour earlier. He'd smiled when I fluffed his pillows and whispered, "Smells like comfort." That was his word for my cooking, comfort. It had been 6 months since he moved in, since his health took a bad turn and he needed someone to be close. I volunteered without hesitation. Vera said she had meetings, Marlena said her knees couldn't handle the stairs, and Franklin, he just nodded, like most things didn't really require his input. They let me take the role because they didn't care for it, but Grandpa did. As I ladled the soup into the serving pot, I thought about the things he'd said lately. Little hints, gentle praise. "You're the only one who listens. You remember how I like things. This house feels like home again." I didn't think it was a big deal. Apparently, I was wrong. By the time dinner rolled around, the table had that unnatural stillness again, the kind that presses on your skin like heavy air. Vera scrolled her phone at the table. Marlena passed rolls without eye contact. Franklin cleared his throat between every bite, like filling the silence with meaningless sound. Then Grandpa, who'd been spooning his soup slowly, looked at me and smiled. "She's the only one who knows how I like it. Just right, not too salty, not too hot, like she reads my thoughts." I smiled back. But the room didn't. Vera froze mid-bite. She looked at Grandpa like he'd just handed me a crown. Then she looked down and kept chewing. Marlena poured herself a glass of water. Franklin didn't flinch, but he suddenly became very interested in his napkin. It all happened so fast after that. Grandpa took another spoonful, then coughed, once, twice. His spoon clattered onto the plate. His hand shook. His face twisted into something I never want to see again. He slumped forward. I stood up, my chair scraping the hardwood floor. "Grandpa?" Vera's voice cut through the chaos like a dagger dipped in sugar. She did something. I saw her drop something in the soup. "What?" I turned to her. "What are you talking about?" Marlena gasped, nearly knocking over her glass. "What did you do?" Franklin pushed back his chair but stayed seated. That figured. "I didn't do anything," I shouted. "He was fine. He just complimented me." Vera pointed, her face calm, eyes cold. "I saw it. White bottle. She poured something in before we sat down." I shook my head. "That's not true." "She's been acting weird for weeks," Marlena added, finding her footing now that Vera had opened the door. "Ever since Dad said he wanted to rewrite the will." "You remember that, don't you, Vera?" "I remember," Vera said, like she was offering up facts to a courtroom. I looked between them. "Are you serious right now?" But no one looked at me. Not even Franklin. The paramedics came within 15 minutes. The house filled with flashing lights, and neighbors began peeking from porches. While they worked on Grandpa, Vera stood with her arms crossed. Marlena cried loudly, louder than the sirens. Then came the police. The officers were calm, procedural. "We received a call from a family member," one of them said. There was concern about an intentional act involving the food. I didn't. "Ma'am, step outside." I was still holding the ladle when they told me to put my hands behind my back. Benny barked once and then fell silent, confused, his tail tucked between his legs. "You don't understand," I pleaded. "I made the soup. I always make the soup. Ask Grandpa, he'll tell you." But they didn't. As they led me to the cruiser, I saw Marlena speaking to an officer, her voice soft but sharp. "She's been unstable, and she always resented how close he was with Vera." Neighbors whispered. I didn't even have shoes on. I'd left them by the back door. They let me grab a jacket, but nothing else. And as they closed the car door behind me, I looked at the house, the one I cleaned, the one I fed, the one I gave up promotions to care for. And I knew the soup wasn't the only thing that had been poisoned. The holding cell was colder than I expected. Steel bench, white walls, no clock. A detective walked in with a clipboard. "Your sister and your mother both mentioned you've been distant, resentful, and emotionally unstable. You want to walk me through that?" I said nothing. "Did you put anything in the food?" "No." "Did you know he recently changed his will?" I looked up. That was new. "I didn't ask for anything," I said. "I just took care of him." He nodded like I was just another checkbox. "Is Grandpa okay?" I asked. No answer. I waited. But the silence told me everything I needed to know. Later, as I sat alone in that cell, I remembered a moment from just a week before. Grandpa had teased me while I watered his plants. "If you promise to keep them alive, maybe I'll leave you the house," he'd said, half joking. Vera had walked by the hallway just then, holding her phone. She didn't say anything. But I remembered the way she paused, the way her eyes narrowed. At the time, I brushed it off. Now I wasn't so sure, because sitting there on that cold metal bench, wearing a sweatshirt that still smelled like rosemary and thyme, one thought wouldn't leave my head. They wanted me to disappear quietly. The guard didn't speak when he opened the door again. He didn't have to. Just the look in his eyes told me it was time. Another conversation I didn't want. Another round where the version of me they had already written would speak louder than anything I could say. They led me back into the same gray room. Fluorescent lights still buzzing like anxious thoughts. The metal chair screeched as I sat, the table colder than I remembered. There was a paper cup filled halfway with water sitting in front of me. Still untouched. I wasn't sure if it was for drinking or for show, like some kind of formality to make this all seem less cruel. The door opened, and a man in a charcoal jacket walked in, file in hand. His badge peeked out just enough to remind me I didn't have any power here. He sat across from me, calm and routine. "We've got statements from your mother and your sister," he said, flipping open the file. I didn't blink. "Want to give your version now?" My throat tightened. I wasn't even sure what my version would be. The truth. The parts I'd lived through? The ones I was still trying to believe had actually happened? He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what bleach does to an 85-year-old man?" I opened my mouth, and for a second, no sound came. But then, quietly, I would never hurt him. He raised an eyebrow, as if surprised I spoke. "Funny, because they both said you've been distant, withdrawn, hostile. You didn't want him around. That's what they said." I looked down at my hands, noticing for the first time a faint soup stain on the sleeve of my sweatshirt. "I took care of him. Not how they told it." He closed the file slowly. "You should think about cooperating, Ms. Dalton, if this goes to trial and it looks like you're not taking responsibility." "I didn't do it," I said, sharper now. He stood without a word and left the room, leaving me with the buzz of the light and the taste of metal in my mouth. Time passed, though I don't know how much. I measured it by the number of times I replayed the past 6 months in my mind. I thought of the nights I skipped dinners with friends to sit with Grandpa, the way I gave up the promotion at work when they said he'd need more care. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anyone to notice. I cleaned up the messes nobody else saw. The bathroom floor when his balance failed, the fridge when they left expired food sitting for weeks. I remembered labeling containers, scheduling medications, reading him his favorite war memoirs. None of that mattered now. None of it made it into anyone's version of me. All they saw was someone quiet, and quiet people are easy to rewrite. The door opened again. I didn't lift my head until I heard the voices. Marlena's tone was bright, too bright. "Hi, honey." Franklin trailed behind, holding a paper bag. They looked like they were arriving at a brunch reservation. I didn't speak. Marlena sat across from me, hands folded like she was saying grace. "Are they treating you all right?" Franklin placed the bag on the table, avoiding my eyes. "Some toiletries, toothbrush, deodorant." I nodded once, tight. Then I looked up. "Why are you doing this?" Marlena's smile froze, then softened into something more practiced. "Stella, we need to focus on moving forward. We can't undo what's already happened." My heart dropped. "You think I did it?" Her eyes flickered. "We're not saying that." "But you're not saying I didn't." Franklin cleared his throat. "Let's just get through this the best way we can." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the sting behind my eyes, refusing to let it break through. "You always told me I was too sensitive, too quiet, too much in my head." Marlena folded her hands tighter. "We just don't want this to ruin your life." "It already has." They sat in silence. Not guilt, not shame, just management. Like they were calculating risk, keeping their options open. I stood up. "You're here to control the story, not to hear mine." Marlena's face hardened. "We're trying to help." "No," I said, firm. "You're trying to erase the part where you didn't." They left after that. No hugs, no promises, just a quiet retreat back into their own safety. Back in my holding cell, I laid down on the bench. The metal bit into my back, but I didn't shift. I stared at the ceiling, thought about all the names I'd been given in that house: quiet one, sensitive one, difficult. The disappointment. They never said I was the golden child, but they made sure I knew I wasn't even bronze. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle over me. My fingers curled against the edge of the bench, not from fear, but from something else now, something boiling, something waiting. I sat on that cold bench with my fingers curled tight, not from fear, but from something deeper, something slower burning. It wasn't adrenaline, it was memory. And as I laid there, breathing shallow under the hum of those fluorescent lights, a moment broke through the static. A dinner. It had been the Thursday before everything fell apart. The kind of evening that slips past you until later, when it haunts you in the quiet. I'd made pot roast, roasted carrots, the usual. Nothing special, just one of those default meals they let me cook because it kept the peace. But that night, Grandpa had reached for his glass, raised it slightly, and said in his slow, gravelly voice, "This house will outlive me. I hope you'll keep it warm when I'm gone, Stella." It hadn't landed like a bomb. It wasn't loud, but it changed the air in the room. Vera's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her lips pressed together. Marlena shifted and launched into a conversation about the neighbor's new landscaping. Franklin scratched behind his ear and took another bite like he hadn't heard a thing. I'd smiled at Grandpa, feeling something twist in my chest, surprise, maybe, or hope. Now, as I remembered that night in my cell, I realized that was the moment, the one that started it. Not the soup, not the coughing, not the cops. That sentence, that one simple wish. And it wasn't just that night. I thought back to 5 days before it happened. I was walking down the hall, carrying a basket of folded towels, about to drop them in Grandpa's room, when I heard voices coming from Marlena's door, half closed. Vera's voice. If she's always hovering, of course he'll leave it to her. Then Marlena's. Then make sure she's not. I stopped dead. They didn't hear me, or if they did, they didn't care. I stood there for a beat too long, fingers digging into the basket. I wanted to say something. Push the door open. Ask what that meant. But instead, I quietly stepped back, left the towels on the stair railing, and went into the kitchen. Now, thinking back, it was like I'd stumbled into a meeting I wasn't invited to. Like they'd already decided something, and I was just late to find out. My stomach tightened. Because there had been other signs, small ones, but now they felt glaring. Vera had suddenly become very interested in helping with dinner. She never cooked. Not once in her adult life had she shown interest in something domestic, unless it could be photographed and filtered. But that week, she'd asked me what Grandpa liked in his tea. She hovered near the pantry. She asked too many questions about soup. At the time, I thought she was trying to connect. Now I knew better. I sat up straighter on the bench, my back aching. My body had grown stiff, but my mind was moving fast. I remembered one more detail. 3 nights before everything unraveled. I'd taken the trash out, same routine as always. Something had leaked inside the kitchen bin. I'd muttered and grabbed a paper towel. But I remember now, there was a shimmer. Something clear, thick, pooled under the edge of a discarded sponge. I wiped it without thinking, and I remember the smell, slightly chemical, but not enough to raise an alarm. That smell was in my sweatshirt now. I hadn't washed it since that night. I looked down at the faint stain near my wrist. They were careful, not sloppy, and suddenly, it all clicked. It wasn't just a smear campaign. It wasn't panic or a misunderstanding. It was design, the timing, the accusations, the choreography. It was as if they'd rehearsed it. Vera yelling, Marlena adding color commentary. Franklin staying mute, just enough to not contradict anyone. They weren't confused. They were united. That hit harder than the cuffs had. Because it meant I wasn't just a scapegoat. I was the target. I wasn't some unfortunate consequence of a bad night. I was the plan. And that, more than anything, made my chest burn. They didn't come up with this overnight. This was calculated. They hadn't just hoped I'd go away. They'd made sure I would. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. They weren't careless, I whispered to no one. They were precise. And the worst part? They thought I wouldn't remember. But I did. Every moment, every look, every word they didn't say out loud, because they didn't have to. Because they'd trained me since childhood to understand the subtext. Don't ask for too much. Don't question. Don't interrupt. Now they were banking on that silence to save them again. But they forgot something. I had nothing left to lose. The words sat on my tongue long after she left. Vera had tossed them at me like scraps. Let it go, or they'll find more than bleach next time. But she should have known better. I was the quiet one, yes, but I remembered everything, especially what they never knew I saw. It was 3 days before Grandpa collapsed, maybe 4. I'd been cleaning up the kitchen late. Everyone else was watching TV, pretending to be a family. And I'd taken the trash out. The bag was heavier than usual. As I pulled it from the bin, something sloshed near the bottom. It left a cloudy trail behind, slick and chemical-smelling. I remember frowning and grabbing paper towels, annoyed at the mess. But now I could see it clearly. That was the moment. The first breadcrumb. There'd also been that night Vera insisted on helping with dinner, her suddenly slicing vegetables with precision, checking seasoning, opening drawers she never used. It had felt strange then, but I'd brushed it off. After all, she was finally engaging. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe she was trying to make peace. Or maybe she was casing the kitchen. Every movement she made felt different in hindsight. She wasn't helping. She was observing, positioning, calculating. My eyes scanned the small window above the toilet in the holding cell. The sun had set by now. I could hear the shift change out in the hall, keys jingling, low voices. And then, suddenly, I remembered something else. The bear, the teddy bear with the red bow that sat on the top shelf in the kitchen. I'd bought it off some parenting blog 6 months ago. It had a discreet nanny cam built into the eye, motion activated, recorded onto a micro SD card. I hadn't told anyone because, frankly, no one cared what I did. It had started as a way to monitor Grandpa when I wasn't home, make sure he wasn't wandering or falling. The angle faced the stove, the counter, the trash can, everything. I hadn't checked it in weeks, maybe months, but if it was still working, it might have recorded exactly what happened that day. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up straighter. There was a phone call left. One. I hadn't used it. I'd been waiting. Too stunned, too disoriented to think. But now my brain felt like it had snapped into place. I asked the guard. He nodded, told me I'd get 5 minutes, led me to a desk, a landline. I dialed Joelle's number from memory. She picked up on the second ring. Stella? I need you to go to my room. Now, I said, keeping my voice low. You remember the teddy bear with the red bow? Top shelf in the kitchen? A pause. Yeah? It's got a camera. Inside. Micro SD. Please, take it. Get it out of the house. Don't tell anyone. Just do it now. Joelle didn't ask questions. Got it. I'm on my way. I whispered a thank you and hung up. For the first time in days, I felt something like control. Thin, like tissue paper, but still something I could hold on to. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of the cot, or the noise, or even the chill in the cell. I stayed awake thinking about the bear, about whether Vera had noticed it, whether she'd guessed it was more than decoration. I replayed every moment, where she'd stood, what she touched. She had paused near the bear once, that I remembered. But did she realize? Or was she too busy being precise? I'd know soon enough. By late morning, after a breakfast I didn't touch, the guard walked me to a separate holding room. Private meeting, he said. I expected Joelle, maybe my lawyer. But when the door opened, it was Vera. She walked in like she owned the floor beneath her heels. No smile, no smugness, just that terrifying calm she'd mastered over the years. The guard left us alone. You're not supposed to be here, I said. She shrugged. Mom pulled a favor, said I should try to reach you. I crossed my arms. Reach me? That what this is? She leaned against the wall, arms folded. You always think you're so smart, so above it all. I don't think that. I just think I'm not like you. Vera's mouth twitched. No, you're not. You don't know how to play the game. She stepped closer. Let this go, Stella, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Drop it. Take a deal. Say you made a mistake. Get therapy. Disappear somewhere quiet. I stared at her, unblinking. Because if you keep digging, she said, they're gonna dig back. You think Bleach is bad? You haven't seen what else I can ruin. There it was, the threat behind the curtain. I stood slowly, meeting her gaze. You're not warning me. You're gloating. She said nothing. You're not scared of the truth, I said. You're scared of me having proof. She leaned in just enough for me to hear her breath. There's no one left to believe you, Stella. You're the weird one, the reclusive one. They'll say you imagined all of it. She turned to leave, but I stopped her with one sentence. You should have made sure I had nothing left to remember. She paused for half a second, just enough to show me I'd struck something. Then she walked out. After Vera walked out and the guard returned, I sat on that bench with my arms crossed and my heart hammering with something I hadn't felt in days. Resolve. Not rage, not panic. Just that icy clarity that settles in when you know there's no turning back. That same night, during dinner, which was no more than a cold sandwich slid under a metal door, I unfolded a napkin wrapped around the plastic fork. Inside was a note written in Joelle's cramped handwriting. Got the bear. Card intact. Footage loading now. Will keep safe. I held that napkin like it was the last dry match in a storm. For the first time since they dragged me off the porch in handcuffs, I exhaled. Joelle hadn't just believed me. She acted, and that changed everything. There was still a long way to go. I wasn't naive, but I wasn't helpless either. The next morning, they brought me into a smaller interview room, bare except for a folding chair and a metal table. I waited there nearly 20 minutes before the door opened again. This time, Marlena walked in, alone. She had a manila envelope in hand, and that same strained smile she wore at family functions she didn't want to attend. Her cardigan was buttoned perfectly. Her posture was composed. I brought something for you, she said, sitting across from me. I said nothing. She pulled a few typed pages from the envelope, spreading them on the table like a dealer about to hand out a losing hand. It's a draft. Statement of apology. We've been working with a lawyer, quietly, of course. If you sign it, the DA will likely settle, diversion program, no record. In a year, this will all be behind you. My eyes landed on the second paragraph. The defendant regrets her emotional instability and the distress caused to her family during this difficult time. I looked up at her. You always said I was the quiet one. Maybe I just learned not to waste my voice on people who don't listen. She didn't flinch. You don't want to drag this out, Stella. It's already been humiliating for everyone. For everyone? I laughed once, bitter. I was the one in handcuffs, Mom. Don't make this worse than it already is, she said, folding the papers again, suddenly brisk. Maybe you should have told that to the one who made it worse, I replied, calmly. She didn't respond. She stood, took the envelope, and walked out. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she say she believed me. Later that afternoon, my lawyer, Lydia Hauser, court-appointed but sharper than most people gave her credit for, arrived with something in her bag. She closed the door behind her and set a small thumb drive on the table. This came to me anonymously, she said. Hand-delivered. I leaned forward. There's footage, she added. I've watched it. I'm not supposed to say much yet, but it's clear. Very clear. I swallowed hard. What does it show? Lydia looked me in the eye. Your sister. In your room. She slides something into your drawer. It's time-stamped. Just an hour before the ambulance was called. My chest tightened. The bottom drawer? She nodded. Soup pot drawer, right? I could have cried. Instead, I just said, game on. The next few days blurred together in a fog of legal procedure and hushed conversations. Lydia didn't promise anything, but her tone shifted. She spoke to me like someone with potential, not someone being babysat. That change alone gave me air. Then came the meeting. It wasn't a trial, just a pre-trial conference. But Lydia made sure it was in person. She said sometimes people need to see what they've tried to destroy, face to face. They led me into the room last. Vera and Marlena were already there. Vera in her perfectly pressed blazer, Marlena looking like she hadn't slept. Franklin sat to the side, quiet, staring at a spot on the floor like it owed him money. Lydia sat beside me, calm, controlled. Before anyone could speak, she slid a laptop across the table and hit play. There was no sound, just the grainy footage from the nanny cam. Vera entered my room like she belonged there. She moved straight to the bottom drawer, pulled a plastic bag from her purse, slipped it in. The timestamp blinked at the corner of the screen. 6:13 p.m. Marlena's face went pale. Vera didn't blink. I leaned forward and said, I have a copy. If you try to bury this, I'll bury the whole narrative. Marlena flinched. Vera's jaw tightened. Franklin still didn't look up. I didn't want to do this like this, I said, but you gave me no choice. You're twisting this, Marlena said, her voice shaky. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said quietly. You did that when you chose a headline over your own daughter. Lydia stood. We'll be submitting the footage as part of our motion to dismiss all charges. If the DA doesn't drop them, we'll go to trial, and this will be Exhibit A. Silence followed, the kind of silence that grows thick. Embarrassment, guilt, exposure. They had nothing left to say. Before I left, I looked straight at Vera. Her expression hadn't changed. This is me being merciful, I said. You don't want to know what I sound like when I stop trying to be polite. After I told Lydia to schedule the deposition, I felt something shift, not in the world, but inside me. It was like the weight had moved from my chest to my shoulders, lighter, but heavier in a different way. Because now that I had confronted them, now that the video was out there, I knew the next wave wasn't going to be legal. It would be personal. And I was right. The first sign came early the next morning. A guard handed me an envelope, no sender, just my name, typewritten. Inside was a printed article, local news outlet, 3rd page. Young woman faces attempted murder charge. Family deeply concerned. Below the headline were quotes. She's always struggled emotionally. We didn't think she was capable of this kind of violence. But looking back, the signs were there, one source claimed. Another line read, We've tried to help her for years. It's tragic it's come to this. No names, just anonymous family members. But I knew those words. Vera had said them before, word for word, behind closed doors, during one of her staged breakdowns where she'd cry just loud enough for people to hear through the wall. I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream, but my jaw locked so tight it ached. That was the first strike. Later that afternoon, Lydia arrived, furious. "They leaked it," she said, pacing the room. "Someone fed the story to the press. They're trying to create a public perception that you're unstable before we even hit court." "Because they know the evidence is on my side," I said. She nodded. "And they're scared of what happens when the narrative isn't theirs anymore." That evening, after Lydia left, one of the guards approached quietly while doing rounds. "You got a voicemail on the public line," he said. "Someone from the news. Left it for you to hear." He handed me the phone and pressed play. "Hi, Stella. This is Christine over at Channel 7. We're running a segment on the case. We understand your family has expressed concern about your mental health. Would you like to comment on your previous evaluations? This is your chance to set the record straight." I ended the call before it finished. There it was, proof they weren't just trying to win. They were trying to erase me. That night, sleep didn't come easy. But sometime between the early hours and dawn, I felt something inside me settle. If they wanted to turn this into a war, I could fight. But they'd have to live with the version of me that no longer asked permission. The next morning, before breakfast trays were delivered, I got a call from Joelle. Her voice was shaking. "They came to my house. Animal control. Said someone reported Benny was being kept in unsafe conditions. They tried to take him, Stella." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "They had paperwork," she continued. "I refused to open the gate. Said he was my service dog. Lied, obviously. But I panicked. What do I do?" Benny. He was the only thing that had ever loved me without condition, without performance. He was mine before Grandpa even moved in. The idea of them using him, the one thing I still had, as leverage, made something snap in me. "Take him to Mr. Winthrop's," I said. "Grandpa's old neighbor. Remember? He still has the fenced yard. Benny knows him." Joelle hesitated. "You're sure?" "Yes. Lock the gate. Don't answer anyone who knocks. They're not playing fair anymore." "They never were," she muttered. After the call ended, I sat there in the quiet. This was no longer about a will or a misunderstanding. This was punishment. For daring to expose them. For not being the daughter who stayed in her lane. I pressed my palms together and took a breath. 2 hours later, I was back in court. Just a status hearing. No arguments. But they were there. Marlena, Vera, and Franklin. Vera looked like she'd walked off a courtroom drama set, sleek blazer, hair pulled into a bun that screamed competence, but her eyes were wary. After the hearing, I passed her in the lobby. She smirked. I stopped. "You almost won," I said. She turned. "Almost. I'm still ahead. No one's convicted me of anything." I stepped closer, not threatening, just honest. "You forgot something." "Oh? What's that?" "I'm not trying to win," I said. "I'm just not letting you write my ending." She rolled her eyes. "You're always so dramatic. And you're always so desperate to be seen as the victim." That hit. Her eyes flared. She stepped forward fast, too fast. Her hand raised like she meant to slap me. A security guard appeared out of nowhere, stepping between us with a calm but firm, "Ma'am, step back." Vera dropped her hand, straightened her blazer like it was all a joke, and turned away. As she walked off, I turned to Lydia. "Schedule the deposition," I said. "I'm done letting them talk without being recorded." The walls inside the courthouse were painted the color of indecision, somewhere between beige and yellowed paper, the kind of bland neutrality designed to keep people from feeling too much. I followed Lydia through the narrow hallway, the carpet muffling every step like a warning not to leave a trace. Joelle was already waiting in the small conference room, seated at the far end of a laminate table with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She gave me a nod as I entered, that kind of quiet reassurance you only get from people who've watched you break and still sat beside you anyway. Lydia motioned for me to sit. Across from us sat Marlena, Franklin, and Vera. Vera looked polished as always, her blazer too sharp for a family meeting. Her eyes scanned me quickly, calculating. I could tell she was trying to read the temperature in the room before the heat rose. Marlena clutched her purse like it was a shield. like maybe inside it was the version of me she'd created and was desperate to protect. Franklin just looked tired. I folded my hands slowly on the table, feeling my pulse in the pads of my fingers, but keeping my face steady. I wasn't there to tremble. I was there to be undeniable. Lydia opened her laptop. "We'll begin," she said, her tone neutral but heavy. She clicked play. The footage started grainy, typical nanny cam quality. The kitchen lit up under late afternoon sunlight. Then the hallway. Then my bedroom. Vera entered without knocking. There was no hesitation in her movements. She walked straight to the bottom drawer, pulled a small clear bag from her sleeve, opened the drawer, and tucked it behind a pile of folded towels. No glancing around, no second guessing. She left as casually as she'd entered. The timestamp in the corner read 6:13 p.m. My breath didn't catch. My stomach didn't flip. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind too many times, but I watched the color drain from Marlena's face like she'd been unplugged. Her hands fidgeted now, unable to find a safe position. Franklin stared straight at the screen, blinking slowly. Vera sat still, almost too still. Lydia closed the laptop with a gentle click. "That's the original footage. Copies have been submitted to the district attorney and will be entered into the formal motion to dismiss charges against my client." Silence, not the kind you stumble into, but the kind that smothers. Then, Marlena broke it. "We didn't know," she started, voice thin. Vera cut her off. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I tilted my head. "It went exactly as far as you wanted it to." Vera's composure cracked. "You always thought you were better," she snapped. "You acted like you deserved him more than I did. Like you were entitled to his love just because you gave up your job and hovered over him all day." I kept my voice even. "I didn't need to be chosen, Vera. I was already seen. You're the one who kept auditioning." She stood. "He said he was going to change the will. You think that didn't mean something? You think that didn't have consequences for the rest of us?" "So you framed me?" I asked. "Because you couldn't stomach the idea that love can't be inherited or earned through optics?" Marlena reached for Vera's arm. "Sit down," she hissed, but her daughter shook her off. "I gave everything to that family," Vera said, turning toward our parents. "And she was always just there, silent, skimming off the sympathy while I had to shine." Franklin's mouth opened for the first time since we entered. "I didn't know you went into her room," he said quietly. I turned to him. "No, you didn't want to know." He lowered his gaze. Lydia calmly stacked her folders. "We will also be filing for perjury and obstruction of justice against Ms. L. Vera Dalton, as well as requesting the court review prior statements made by Mr. and Mrs. Dalton for false reporting." Marlena's eyes widened. "That's not fair. We were misled." "You misled yourselves," I said. Lydia stood, motioning toward me. "We're done here. My client will no longer be speaking without record." Joelle stood with me. She hadn't said a word during the entire meeting. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was louder than all their silence. I gathered my things slowly, savoring the quiet, not because it was peaceful, but because it was mine. As I turned to leave, I looked each of them in the eye. "You buried me," I said, "but I remembered how to dig." I walked out of that conference room with my head held higher than it had been in weeks, but I wasn't done. And I knew the next conversation would be the hardest one yet, the one that wasn't scheduled by court clerks or filtered through a lawyer. Later that day, as the air outside shifted into the dull chill of late fall, I got the call. Lydia met me at the entrance of the hospital. She didn't speak much, only nodded as she led me through the glass doors and down a corridor where the walls smelled faintly of antiseptic and loss. Grandpa Harlan had woken up. The nurse outside his room said he'd asked for me. Not Vera, not Marlena, me. I stepped inside quietly. He was propped up in bed, pale but alert. His eyes, always a steel blue, locked onto mine like I was the only real thing in the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I pulled the chair closer to his bed and sat down, gripping the armrest so tightly my fingers turned cold. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. It was her, wasn't it? I didn't pretend. I just nodded once. I thought I dreamt it, he murmured. She brought me that tea, then fussed with the soup while your back was turned. I thought I must have imagined it. You didn't, I said softly. He closed his eyes briefly, pain etched into his face. I should have said something sooner. I should have told your mother years ago that playing favorites wasn't parenting. He opened them again. Stella, I'm sorry I didn't protect you. The lump in my throat stayed lodged as I whispered, You did, Grandpa. You saw me. The next morning, after some paperwork, Grandpa gave an official statement to the authorities. Lydia and I sat in a side room while a detective recorded him under oath. He described the events clearly, recounting how Vera brought him a cup of chamomile, lingered while I was in the pantry, and stirred the soup with a spoon she hadn't washed. He ended his statement with something I hadn't expected. I trust Stella. I never trusted the performance, and if anything happens to me, make sure she keeps that house. That was the second time in 2 days that someone told the truth out loud. The next afternoon, Vera was called in for formal questioning. I wasn't there. Lydia was, but she told me everything. They presented the nanny cam footage, the timestamp, Grandpa's testimony, Joelle's written statement. Vera denied it at first, called it manipulation. She edited the video, she said. They're framing me because they know I was always closer to him. Then she folded. Lydia said it wasn't dramatic. She just stared down at the table, and when asked again if she placed the bag in my drawer, she said, Yes. And then, I didn't think he'd get sick. I thought she'd get probation, maybe. I didn't think he'd collapse like that. She started crying, not the kind that asks for forgiveness, but the kind that knows it's already too late to ask. It was about the house, she admitted. It's always been about the house. The moment that information was logged, things moved quickly. Charges against me were dropped within 48 hours. A press release was drafted by the DA's office. But what I remember most was the courtroom the day the arrest warrants were issued. Vera stood beside her lawyer, no blazer this time, just a muted sweater that swallowed her whole. The judge listed the charges: tampering with evidence, filing a false report, attempted poisoning. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she didn't look at me. Marlena and Franklin were next. Obstruction, perjury. Marlena fainted before the bailiff could even escort her out, collapsed onto the floor like a dramatist at curtain call. Franklin didn't catch her. He just stood there. I left the courthouse through the side door. The press had gathered out front, eager to snap the face of a wrongly accused woman now cleared of every charge. I didn't give them what they wanted. No interviews, no statements. I just kept walking. That evening, after I returned to Grandpa's house, yes, his house, the one I would soon call mine, he handed me an envelope. I wrote this before it all went to hell, he said. Didn't know if I'd be around to give it to you. I waited until later to read it, in my old bedroom, the walls still lined with shelves I'd once used to store books and secrets. The letter was short, just a few lines. I saw you, long before they tried to erase you. I saw the quiet way you carried things no one noticed. You were never invisible. Not to me. I didn't sob, but the tears came, soft and stubborn, soaking into the paper before I could stop them. I read it 3 times, and for the first time since the whole nightmare began, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. And sometimes, that's more powerful. After the dust settled, there wasn't silence. Not really. Not the kind of silence that comes with calm. Not the kind that folds over you like a blanket and lets you breathe again. No, this was the kind of silence that echoes, that lingers. That follows you into the grocery store and the post office and down quiet back roads when no one's around to ask how you're doing anymore because they assume the worst part is over. But you know better. You're still standing in the wreckage. And it echoes. The statements had been read. The cameras packed up. The courthouse steps had emptied of reporters, microphones, strangers clutching their notebooks. But I still felt like I was standing there, frozen under the weight of every word that had been said, and all the ones that hadn't. Vera pled guilty just 7 days after her formal arraignment. Her lawyer called it cooperation, like it was a gift, a gesture of goodwill. She cried at sentencing. big, trembling sobs that shook her frame but didn't move me. Whether those tears came from remorse or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. And by then, I didn't care enough to try. The judge called her actions a deliberate betrayal masked in familial loyalty. He was right. 3 years in state prison. That was her sentence. Marlena and Franklin managed to avoid prison, barely. They were given probation, community service, and mandatory therapy. The court called it sufficient consequence for the lies they told, for the obstruction, for every time they chose to protect the version of the story that kept them comfortable instead of the one that was real. I remember watching Marlena during the final hearing. Her posture was stiff, shoulders pulled inward like she wanted to disappear. Her lips stayed pressed in a thin line, her hands wrung together. But not once did she look in my direction. Not when the charges were read, not when the judge spoke directly about her choices, not even when the verdict was handed down. The house on Cedar Street fell into a hush after that, but it wasn't the hush of peace. It wasn't healing. It was the kind of silence that screams, the kind that sits heavy in the air and reminds you of everything that went unsaid, every apology that never came, every hurt that was minimized, justified, buried beneath decades of performative smiles and polite nods at family barbecues. I didn't go back. Not even to pack a box. Not even to retrieve the sweater I knew was still hanging on the back closet door. That house had long stopped being mine. Harlan offered it to me more than once. "It's yours now, kiddo," he'd say, sipping his tea from that chipped mug he refused to throw out. "Always should have been." And maybe that should have meant something. Maybe it would have years ago. But I felt something tender twist in my chest every time he said it. A kind of sadness that didn't have a name. So I always replied the same way. "This place was never mine," I told him gently. "It was yours. I need something that is mine now." So I left. I moved 30 miles north into a sleepy little town with uneven sidewalks and a coffee shop that played jazz in the mornings. I rented a small apartment above an antique bookstore where the windows fogged up every winter and the floorboards creaked like they were telling stories of everyone who had lived there before me. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No one had ever yelled in that kitchen. No one had stormed down those hallways with rage disguised as righteousness. The ghosts didn't know the address. I brought only a few things from the old life with me, one of Grandpa's hand-built chairs, the worn-out copy of East of Eden we'd read together, the spine broken, notes scribbled in the margins, a photo or two. The rest? I left it behind, let the dust keep it company. Then, a few months later, I opened the cafe. It was modest, just a single room, a converted corner store with sun-faded curtains and mismatched tables salvaged from yard sales and thrift stores. I stocked the shelves with second-hand paperbacks. The chalkboard menu leaned slightly to the left, no matter how many times I tried to straighten it. We called it the Listening Post. Joelle helped me pick the name. Said it sounded like something rooted and honest, a place where people came to be heard. Every Wednesday, we hosted Memory Hour. Seniors would gather, regulars, newcomers, passers-by who saw the sign and decided to stop in. They told stories, pie in hand, cider in mugs, war stories, first kisses. Road trips gone wrong, stories of children lost and lovers found again decades later in places no one expected. I didn't talk much. I didn't need to. I listened. And in listening, I began to stitch myself back together. Some people recognized me, the ones who remembered the news cycle. They would pause at the door, linger like they weren't sure if they were welcome. But Benny, my old golden mutt, always knew. He'd wag his tail at the kind ones, bark once at the ones who stared too long. I joked that he was my lie detector. The regulars believed it. Benny was slower now, his hips stiff, his eyes cloudy at the edges. His muzzle had gone mostly gray. He'd fall asleep during Memory Hour, snoring softly beside the heater. But he still followed me from room to room, still waited by the register when I counted tips at night, still looked at me like I was the best decision he ever made. Then one Tuesday morning, a letter arrived. Postmarked from the state prison. Vera, 3 pages, handwritten. Her script smaller than I remembered, neater, like she was trying to be careful, trying to be understood. The first page was apology, lines like, I wasn't myself. I didn't know how to deal with being replaced. The second page was justification. I was always told to perform. Everything had to look perfect. I didn't know how to stop without becoming invisible. The third, quiet, no sign-off, no signature, just a single sentence written alone at the bottom. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just didn't want the last thing you remembered about me to be the worst. I didn't tear it up, didn't reread it. I folded it neatly and placed it in the cafe office drawer labeled Unfinished Business, right beside Grandpa's original will, and a photo from the county fair, back when we still knew how to pretend well enough to be convincing. That night, I stayed late after closing. The cafe was still except for the hum of the refrigerator and Benny's soft breathing beneath the counter. I pulled out my journal, one I hadn't touched in months, and wrote a single line. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to stop bleeding where someone else stabbed. Then I closed it, turned off the lights, knelt beside Benny and scratched behind his ear. I think I'm finally done, I whispered. Not with healing, but with trying to be who they needed me to be. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I meant it. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who sat across the dinner table your whole life. But healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's choosing your peace over their approval. What would you do if the people who raised you also tried to ruin you? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful family stories that cut deep and stay with you. We've got more truths waiting to be told.